200 guests held their breath as my own mother's hand cracked across my face so hard my diamond earring flew across the marble floor. They thought I'd bow down, hand over my $2 million penthouse, and smile for the cameras. But what they didn't know was that every second was being live-streamed, and the man walking through those ballroom doors held the power to end my father's empire in one sentence. Stay with me because this story will make you question what family really means. My name is Amelia Grant, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the shadow in my own family's story. Shadows don't shine. Shadows don't get praised. They exist to make the light of someone else seem brighter. In my family, that light was my younger sister, Isabella. From the very beginning, my parents, Charles and Margaret Grant, treated Isabella like she was a princess descended from heaven. Every smile she gave was framed as pure gold. Every grade she earned, no matter how small, was celebrated with banners and cake. Meanwhile, my achievements were brushed aside, minimized, or twisted into criticisms. If I came home with straight A's, the response wasn't, "Well done, Amelia." It was, "Don't get cocky, work harder. Maybe then you'll be as graceful as Isabella." Imagine being a 10-year-old girl, clutching your honor roll certificate, only to hear your mother murmur, "Pretty papers don't make a daughter marriageable." I wanted to disappear. By the time I was 12, I understood the unspoken hierarchy of the Grant household. Isabella was the prize, and I was the problem. She got ballet lessons, cheerleading practice, and new dresses for every recital. I got hand-me-downs and lectures about focusing too much on books. My father, Charles, would beam with pride as Isabella twirled in pink satin. But when I asked if he could attend my debate competition, he sighed and said, "Talking doesn't win husbands, Amelia. Learn from your sister." That one stung more than I admitted. Growing up, humiliation was served at every family dinner. Isabella sat at the center, glowing like a jewel, while relatives leaned across the table to compliment her beauty, her sweetness, her perfect future. And me? I was the topic of whispered jokes. Aunt Clara once smirked. "Maybe Amelia should marry her textbooks, since no man seems interested." Laughter erupted while I sat frozen, cheeks burning, holding back tears that no one noticed. The cruelty wasn't just in words, it was in silence. Birthdays forgotten. Achievements ignored. Victories erased. At 15, when I won first place in a national essay contest, my parents didn't even show up to the award ceremony. Isabella had a minor cold that day, and they stayed home to tend to her sniffles. That night, as I stood alone on a stage clutching my trophy, I realized something. In my parents' eyes, no victory of mine would ever matter. And yet, I kept trying. I worked harder than anyone around me. Straight A's weren't enough. I aimed for scholarships, internships, anything that might finally make them look at me with pride, but each attempt only deepened the wound. When I told them I'd been accepted into a top university, Margaret smiled politely and said, "That's nice, Amelia. But make sure you don't come back with city arrogance. Isabella will be planning her wedding by then." Their message was clear. My worth wasn't tied to my mind or achievements. It was tied to how well I could serve Isabella's spotlight. As the years passed, the comparisons grew sharper. Isabella was soft, delicate, the embodiment of everything traditional. I was ambitious, independent, and therefore, according to my parents, unfeminine. She was praised for her caring heart, while I was chastised for being too cold, too stubborn. If she volunteered at the children's hospital, she was an angel. If I worked overtime at an internship, I was obsessed with money. The double standard was suffocating. One memory still slices through me like broken glass. At a family reunion, a relative asked my father, "Charles, what about Amelia? What's she been up to?" He chuckled, shaking his head, and replied, "Amelia? She's just too much, too serious, too focused on work. We worry she'll scare men away." Isabella laughed along, adding, "Maybe one day she'll learn to be fun like me." Everyone chuckled, everyone except me. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried silently, staring at the tiled floor, promising myself that one day I'd build a life so extraordinary that their words would choke them. But promises don't erase a pain. Every slight, every jab, every dismissal carved into me a deeper scar. I became addicted to achievement not because I craved success, but because I craved recognition. And the cruelest part? It never came. Isabella was the bride in waiting. I was the backup plan, the forgotten one, the family disappointment. By the time I turned 18, I had already stopped expecting affection. Love wasn't something I'd get from Charles and Margaret. Validation wasn't something I'd ever receive at the dinner table. All I could do was channel every ounce of pain into ambition. What I didn't know back then but would discover years later was that those very scars would become my armor. Every insult became fuel. Every humiliation, a silent training ground. And though I didn't realize it at the time, every time my parents ignored me, they were unknowingly sharpening a weapon. Me. I was no longer just Amelia, the overlooked daughter. I was becoming Amelia, the storm they would one day regret underestimating. By the time I hit my late 20s, I had done everything the world told me would earn respect. I had the Ivy League degree, the promotions that came earlier than expected, the 7-figure deals with my name stamped across them. My job at Sterling Capital wasn't just a job, it was a battlefield where I had fought tooth and nail and won. At 29, I closed a deal in Singapore that made headlines in the Financial Times. That one contract alone was worth more than my parents' house, their pensions, and every savings account combined. And with the commission, I bought my penthouse 45 floors above the city, with windows that swallowed entire horizons. Floor-to-ceiling glass, marble counters imported from Italy, a view so wide it made the skyline feel like mine alone. That penthouse wasn't just real estate. It was proof. Proof that the girl who had been mocked at family dinners had climbed high enough that their whispers could no longer reach her. Proof that discipline, drive, and determination could build a sanctuary out of scorn. But here's the cruelest irony. My family never even acknowledged it. When I mentioned casually to my mother, Margaret, that I'd purchased a place in the city, she smirked and said, "A little apartment? I hope it's not too cramped." My father, Charles, chuckled. "Well, at least she finally stopped renting. They never asked to see it. They never asked how I managed it." To them, my 4,500 square foot penthouse was reduced to a little apartment. I remember one Christmas when Isabella gushed about her fiancé Ethan buying her a new SUV. The family applauded like he had invented fire. I sat quietly, sipping wine, until Aunt Clara turned to me and asked, "So, Amelia, what are you driving these days?" "A Tesla," I replied. The table burst into laughter. "A Tesla?" "Oh, Amelia, always exaggerating," Isabella giggled, rolling her eyes. My father waved a hand dismissively. "Don't get carried away." She probably meant a used one. I wanted to pull out the key fob right there. I wanted to tell them the Tesla was parked outside, pristine, bought in cash. But I didn't. I swallowed the humiliation and reminded myself, proof doesn't need validation. Still, the sting burned deeper than I let on. The comparisons never stopped. Isabella was delicate, radiant, the perfect bride to be. I was called too masculine, too independent, too obsessed with work. When Isabella posted selfies from charity events, she was an angel with a golden heart. When I posted articles about breaking barriers in finance, relatives whispered, "She thinks she's better than us." It didn't matter what I achieved. To them, I was still the same Amelia who had been labeled difficult at 10 years old. One evening, after a 12-hour flight from Tokyo, I dragged myself straight to a family dinner. I had just secured a partnership with Samsung that would funnel millions into Sterling Capital's accounts. I thought foolishly maybe this time they would be proud. Instead, my father raised a glass to Isabella's generosity for organizing a bake sale at the local children's hospital. The family cheered, clapped, hugged her. Then my mother turned to me with a thin smile and said, "And Amelia, maybe one day you'll learn that family matters more than money." The air left my lungs. Money? Did they think my career, my sacrifices, my relentless drive were just about money? They didn't see the sleepless nights, the red-eye flights, the endless hours sharpening myself into someone who could never again be ignored. They didn't see the weight of being a woman in boardrooms filled with men who waited for me to fail. They didn't see me surviving in a world that had no mercy, where every handshake was a duel and every contract a war. All they saw was Isabella's glow. The dismissal was so sharp, I excused myself and stepped outside into the freezing night air. Standing alone on the porch, I stared at the dark sky and thought, what would it take? What would it take for them to see me? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Nothing. No award, no title, no penthouse, no luxury car would ever rewrite the narrative they had chosen for me. Amelia, the disappointment. Amelia, the unlovable one. Amelia, the one who would always come second to Isabella. So I stopped trying. Not at work, I poured myself into sterling capital with even more fury, climbing higher, faster, sharper. But I stopped trying with them. I stopped waiting for pride, for approval, for affection that would never come. Yet every insult carved into me became another brick in my fortress. By the time Isabella's wedding approached, I wasn't just successful. I was formidable. But my family didn't know that. And maybe, just maybe, that ignorance would be their downfall. The morning of my sister's wedding felt less like a celebration and more like an ambush waiting to happen. I didn't know it yet, but every flower, every polished silver spoon, every perfectly placed centerpiece in that ballroom had been arranged not just for Isabella's big day but for my humiliation. I arrived at the Grandview Hotel at 8 in the morning, 3 hours before the ceremony. The venue was breathtaking. White roses everywhere, golden accents glinting under chandeliers, a string quartet softly rehearsing in the corner. Isabella had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, and with Ethan Caldwell's wealthy family footing part of the bill, she was going to get it. I had even contributed $50,000 myself, a transfer I made without hesitation because I thought, naively, that maybe generosity would soften the edges of their cruelty. But in true Grant family fashion, no one ever mentioned my contribution. When my mother, Margaret, saw me, her lips pursed. She looked me up and down and muttered, "That dress, couldn't you have chosen something more feminine? You look like you're heading to a corporate meeting, not your sister's wedding." I smoothed the navy silk gown I'd chosen, elegant, understated, professional. "Good morning to you too, Mom," I replied evenly. "Doesn't Isabella look radiant in her gown?" she continued, ignoring my words entirely. "A proper bride. She just glows." The comparison sliced through me like it always had. 32 years old, and I was still being reminded that I was never soft enough, never delicate enough, never enough. Then came my father, Charles, calling across the ballroom. "Amelia, can you check the seating arrangements? But don't reorganize everything like you always do." I bit my tongue as I scanned the chart. Divorced couples placed together, business rivals seated side by side, a complete disaster. But pointing it out would only make me the difficult one again, so I nodded. "Of course, Dad. I'll make sure everything is perfect for Isabella." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough. "Family comes first, Amelia. You'll understand that when you settle down, if you ever do." The jab landed. I kept my smile steady, but inside, I could feel the familiar sting. My accomplishments erased in an instant, replaced by the reminder that my unmarried status was, to them, my greatest failure. As the morning stretched on, the whispers started. Relatives sizing me up like I was some strange outsider. Still no ring on Amelia's finger. Poor Margaret. At least she has Isabella giving her grandchildren soon. My cousin smirked across the room. "Maybe if you spent less time in boardrooms, Amelia, you'd have a +1 today." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. I wanted to shout that being single was my choice, that I had dated men, successful, ambitious men who simply couldn't handle a woman outpacing them, that I refused to shrink myself just to make someone else comfortable. But I knew it wouldn't matter. In their eyes, success wasn't defined by penthouses or promotions. It was defined by rings and babies. And in that measure, I was worthless. The final insult came from Aunt Sally, who asked brightly, "How's that little apartment of yours in the city? Must be cozy." "It's a penthouse, actually," I corrected quietly. The group burst into laughter. Isabella, glowing in her bridal gown, swept over and joined in. "She says she bought a Tesla last year too. Can you imagine?" "I did buy a Tesla, It was parked outside. But I swallowed the truth like poison and forced a smile. Standing by the ballroom's grand windows, I stared at the skyline, the very one my penthouse towered above. 10 years of relentless work, 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of clawing my way up to prove I wasn't invisible. That penthouse wasn't just glass and concrete. It was my sanctuary, proof that I had made it. Proof that I didn't need their approval. And yet, as I stood there, watching Isabella being fussed over by relatives, I felt the chill of their plans settling over me. Something in their smiles was too practiced, too rehearsed. My parents whispered in corners, stealing glances in my direction. My stomach tightened. I didn't know the specifics yet, but I knew this family well enough to sense a setup. Later, as guests began to arrive and the hum of conversation filled the room, I caught a fragment of my father's voice. After the toast, we'll make the announcement about the penthouse. My heart stopped. My mother's reply was hushed but venomous. She won't have a choice, not in front of everyone. She's too proud to make a scene at her sister's wedding. The casual cruelty of it stole the breath from my lungs. Not just an offhand suggestion, a plan. They had orchestrated this. Every flower, every polished spoon, every smiling guest was part of a trap designed to corner me, to strip me of the very thing that symbolized my independence. And I knew, in that moment, that the wedding wasn't just Isabella's. It was my trial. The gavel was ready, the jury was seated, and the sentence my penthouse had already been decided. The reception had barely begun when my father, Charles Grant, tapped his champagne glass with a spoon. The room hushed instantly. 200 guests turned toward him, expecting another round of glowing praise for Isabella and her new husband, Ethan Caldwell. But my stomach tightened, because I already knew what was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles began, his booming voice filling the ballroom, "family means everything to us. And there is nothing we wouldn't do for our children's happiness." He glanced at Isabella, his eyes shining with theatrical warmth. "That's why tonight, we are thrilled to announce a very special gift. My eldest daughter, Amelia, has graciously agreed to give her sister and Ethan the keys to her city penthouse." The room erupted. Applause, gasps, even tears of admiration. Isabella pressed her hands to her chest in feigned shock, though the smug smile tugging at her lips betrayed her. Ethan wrapped an arm around her, nodding proudly, as if he'd earned the gift himself. 200 pairs of eyes turned to me. For a split second, I stood frozen, champagne glass trembling in my hand. The world spun in slow motion. They had done it. They had truly ambushed me, cornered me in the one place they thought I'd never fight back. A public spectacle designed to paint me as selfish if I refused, heartless if I resisted, monstrous if I dared to say no. "Amelia," Charles called, beckoning me toward the stage. "Come stand with your sister for this special moment." The applause grew louder. Phones lifted into the air, cameras flashing, guests smiling through tears at what they thought was generosity. Somewhere in the back, I saw Ethan's younger brother holding up his phone, streaming the whole thing live on Facebook. And in that instant, something inside me snapped. I set my glass down with deliberate care and rose slowly. "I'm sorry." "What?" My voice carried clearly without a microphone. Charles's smile faltered. "Your penthouse, sweetheart. For Isabella and Ethan." "No. This wasn't discussed with me," I said, tone sharp but controlled. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Don't be selfish on your sister's day," my father snapped into the mic, ensuring the entire ballroom heard. "Dad, this is inappropriate. We can discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," my mother, Margaret, cut in, snatching the microphone. "It's a wedding gift from the family." "It's my property," I replied, voice calm but firm. "And I haven't agreed to anything." "No." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering accusations. How could she? On her sister's wedding day? Isabella's eyes shimmered with crocodile tears as she clutched Ethan's hand. "Amelia," she whispered into her microphone, perfectly timed for maximum sympathy. I thought you wanted me to be happy." "Your happiness doesn't require my home, Isabella." "It's just property," Charles barked, face reddening. "You can buy another one." No. Then you buy her one, I shot back. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Someone clutched their pearls. The wedding photographer's camera clicked wildly, capturing every second of the disaster. Amelia, please, Ethan pleaded, stepping forward as the so-called peacemaker. We'd take such good care of it. I'm sure you would, I said evenly. But the penthouse is not available. Margaret's face flushed an alarming shade of crimson. Charles looked like he might collapse from rage. Isabella's mask cracked, bitterness flashing across her face before she composed herself again. Come on, Amelia, Aunt Sally called. It's family. You don't even have a family to fill it, Uncle Tom added cruelly. Isabella needs it more. Be reasonable, my cousin Derek shouted. Stop being so difficult. It's not like you can't afford another one, Aunt Patricia sneered, with your big, important job. They still didn't believe I was successful. Even now, with every visible sign of my achievements, they clung to the belief that I was exaggerating, fabricating, or somehow unworthy. That's generous of you to assume, I said dryly, keeping my composure. But my finances are not up for public discussion. Everything is about money with you, Margaret spat into the microphone. Your sister's happiness should matter more than property. No. If Isabella's happiness depends on stealing what I've earned, I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the whispers, perhaps you should reconsider what happiness really means. The crowd gasped again. Someone booed from the back. And then Margaret descended. Her heels clicked like gunshots against the marble floor as she stormed across the dance floor, still gripping the microphone with white knuckles. Her face twisted with rage, a dangerous cocktail of humiliation and fury. You will not ruin this day, Amelia, she seethed. I'm not the one creating a scene, Mother. We raised you better than this. After everything we've given you. You gave Isabella everything, I interrupted coldly. I earned what I have. Her eyes burned with years of resentment. And before I could take another breath, her hand shot across my face. The slap rang out like a gunshot. The entire ballroom froze. My head snapped to the side, cheek blazing with heat. My diamond earring flew across the floor, skittering across the marble as 200 guests gasped in unison. Silence. Utter, suffocating silence. No music, no whispers. Not even the waitstaff moved. Only the echo of the slap remained, reverberating against the crystal chandeliers. I didn't raise a hand to my face. I didn't cry. I simply stood there, my body rigid, my heart pounding so loud it was deafening in my ears. Slowly, deliberately, I walked across the ballroom to where my earring had landed. Each click of my heels against the marble cut through the silence like a drumbeat. I bent down, picked up the diamond stud, and refastened it in my ear. Then I stood tall, smoothed my gown, and turned to face my mother. Excuse me, I said, voice clear and steady. Then, without another glance at the stage, I picked up my clutch and began walking toward the exit. Behind me, chaos erupted. Chairs scraped, voices rose, people shouted, Isabella cried. But I didn't look back, because in that moment, I realized something my family had never understood. You can only break someone who believes they still need you. And I didn't need them anymore. The ballroom doors closed behind me with a heavy thud. But the sting of my mother's slap still burned across my cheek like fire. I pressed a hand against it, feeling the heat spread. But no tears fell. I refused to give her that satisfaction. 200 guests had just watched my mother strip me bare, not just of dignity, but of humanity. And yet, as humiliating as it was, that moment crystallized something I hadn't allowed myself to fully embrace. I would never belong to them. Not as the overlooked daughter, not as the family ATM, not as Isabella's safety net. I stepped into the hotel elevator, its mirrored walls reflecting the flush of my skin, the storm in my eyes. The phone in my clutch buzzed violently. 3 missed calls from Alexander Wu, CEO of Sterling Capital, my boss, my mentor, and the man who secretly owned 40% of my father's company. A text lit up the screen. Saw the live stream. Your call. Say the word. My heart pounded. Live stream. I hadn't realized until then that the entire ambush, the announcement, the refusal, the slap, had been broadcast to the world. Ethan's younger brother had propped his phone on the table, streaming everything to Facebook Live. The little red dot blinking in the corner of that phone had seemed insignificant in the chaos. But now? Now it was a weapon. Hundreds of people had already watched my humiliation. By the time I stepped into that elevator, thousands more were seeing it in real time. Every cruel word, every manipulative demand, every ounce of entitlement was no longer just family drama, it was evidence. I typed back with steady fingers. Wait for my signal. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the hushed lobby. Guests wandered in from the valet line, laughing, oblivious to the storm brewing upstairs. I slipped out into the cold night air, my heels clicking against the pavement. For the first time all evening, I inhaled without feeling like the walls were closing in. Because now the battlefield wasn't just the ballroom. It was the internet. It was the corporate world. It was the empire my parents had built on arrogance and entitlement. An empire balanced precariously on the capital of a man they had no idea was watching. Alexander Wu wasn't just my CEO. He was the insurance policy I hadn't known I'd need. 6 months earlier, when I finalized the purchase of my penthouse, Alexander had insisted on adding an unusual clause to the paperwork. "Trust me," he'd said, sliding the contract across the table. "You'll want protection against third-party interference, especially coercion from family members." I had laughed then. My family was cruel, yes. Manipulative, absolutely. But dangerous? No. They weren't villains in a courtroom drama. They were just toxic. I signed the clause anyway, thinking it a quirky precaution from a man who had clawed his way up from nothing. But tonight, that clause was no longer quirky. It was salvation. Clause 15. 3. If anyone attempted to force me to surrender my penthouse under duress, Sterling Capital retained the right of first refusal and could intervene legally. The penthouse wasn't just property. It was corporate asset. And I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was an executive, protected by an empire my father depended on without realizing it. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Alexander. "I'm outside. 2 lawyers with me. Are you ready?" "Ready." The word tasted foreign. Was I ready? My cheek throbbed, my pride ached, my heart felt like shattered glass. But beneath it all was a core of steel forged from every insult, every dismissal, every moment of invisibility. Yes, I was ready. I typed back. "Give me 45 minutes. Let me get home. Execute the contingency." "Understood," came his reply. As my Uber pulled away from the hotel, I looked back at the glittering ballroom through the tinted window. Behind those doors, they were still toasting, still sneering, still convinced they had broken me. But what they didn't know was that every second of their cruelty had been recorded, streamed, shared. Their private manipulation had become public evidence. For years, they had underestimated me, the difficult daughter, the disappointment, the failure to secure a husband. But tonight, the tables were about to turn. I touched my swollen cheek again, letting the pain remind me. This was no longer about just a penthouse. This was about boundaries, about dignity, about refusing to be anyone's sacrifice ever again. By the time my Uber pulled up to the entrance of my penthouse tower, the live stream had been shared hundreds of times. Comments flooded in. Strangers, people I had never met, were typing words I had never heard from my own family. "She doesn't deserve that. Amelia is right. Stand your ground. Stand your ground." That's exactly what I planned to do. Upstairs, I slipped out of my gown and into jeans and a soft sweater. Armor wasn't needed anymore. My weapon was already in motion, Alexander, flanked by lawyers, walking into the very ballroom where my family thought they had destroyed me. Another text buzzed across my screen. "Walking in now. Your father just saw me. His face went white. Your mother is screaming." I smiled, the first real smile I had managed all evening. They had slapped me in front of 200 witnesses. They had tried to strip me of everything I had earned. Now, it was my turn. Back in my penthouse, I pressed an ice pack against my cheek, watching the city lights flicker far below. The sting of my mother's slap had dulled into a throbbing ache, but my mind was razor sharp. My phone buzzed again. Entering the ballroom now, Alexander Wu. I set the ice pack aside, my pulse quickening. In my imagination, I could see it unfolding. Alexander in his tailored Armani suit, flanked by two lawyers carrying leather briefcases, walking with that quiet authority that made entire boardrooms fall silent. My parents had no idea who was about to walk through those ballroom doors. Another text came almost instantly. Richard just saw me. His face turned white. Richard, my father. I closed my eyes and pictured it Charles Grant, the man who had spent decades reducing me to not enough, realizing too late that his silent business partner was the same man now walking toward him with my name on his lips. Then came another buzz. Your mother is screaming. I actually laughed. A raw, cathartic laugh that burst out of me before I could stop it. For the first time that night, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt powerful. My phone rang. I answered. Amelia, Alexander's voice carried through the line, steady and commanding. You're on speaker. In the background, I could hear the stunned silence of the ballroom forks clinking against abandoned plates. Murmurs cut short. An atmosphere thick with disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander's voice boomed. There seems to be some confusion tonight. Allow me to clarify. My heart pounded as he continued, each word slicing through the air like a blade. Amelia Grant is not just an employee at Sterling Capital. She is our Vice President of Development, overseeing our entire Asia-Pacific expansion. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I could almost see the faces relatives with jaws hanging open. Isabella blinking in disbelief. Ethan stiffening uncomfortably. That's impossible, I heard my father stammer. The Singapore deal that netted $40 million, Alexander continued, unfazed. Amelia led it. The Tokyo office, now our most profitable branch, Amelia built it from the ground up. The Samsung partnership that your company desperately wanted a piece of? Amelia negotiated every detail. She is one of the most valuable executives in this city. No, my mother's voice rose, shrill and desperate. You're lying. She's exaggerating. She's corrupted by money and corporate greed. Mrs. Grant, Alexander said, his tone cutting. The penthouse you tried to take from your daughter wasn't bought with fantasies. It was part of her executive compensation package. And that package includes protections. What protections? My father asked, his voice cracking. Clause 15.3 of our shareholder agreement, Alexander said coldly. The one you signed 5 years ago. If anyone attempts to coerce Amelia into surrendering her corporate assets, Sterling Capital has the legal right to intervene. Which, based on the live stream already viewed over 20,000 times, is exactly what happened tonight. The line went so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Then Alexander continued. As someone who owns 40% of your company, Richard, I am deeply concerned about your judgment, publicly attempting to strip your daughter of her property, allowing your wife to assault her in front of witnesses. This raises serious questions about your leadership. You can't, this is family business, my father sputtered. The moment you made it public, Alexander snapped, you made it my business. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs, the chaos of a family's empire unraveling in real time. Amelia, Alexander said, his voice softening slightly. Would you like to press charges for assault? The ballroom must have gone still again. I imagined my mother's face, drained of color, my father's hands trembling on the tablecloth, Isabella's perfect bridal smile crumbling. I'll consider it, I said into the phone, my voice clear and strong. Alexander didn't miss a beat. Let me explain to everyone here. The livestream shows clear assault and attempted coercion. This triggers clause 15.3. Richard, that clause gives me the right to call an emergency board meeting within 24 hours. With my 40% and the Jensen Trust's 15, your leadership could be removed before the week is over. This is extortion, my mother shrieked. No, Mrs. Grant, Alexander replied icily. Extortion is demanding your daughter surrender her property in front of 200 witnesses. This is accountability. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Then Alexander delivered the final blow. You have 48 hours to issue a public apology to Amelia, a real one, acknowledging her professional achievements and her right to her property. If you fail, I will exercise my rights as majority partner, and your company will collapse before summer. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone to my ear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked daughter, the backup plan, the disappointment. I was the woman who had built her own empire, and now, everyone knew it. In that ballroom, my family's power had cracked like thin glass, and through the fracture, my name, my truth shone brighter than ever. The line went dead, but I could still picture the ballroom. 200 guests sitting in stunned silence, the air heavy with humiliation that didn't belong to me anymore, it belonged to them. My phone buzzed with another text from Alexander. Your father is panicking. 3 clients already reached out. The fallout has begun. I set the phone down and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city stretched endlessly below, glittering and alive. Somewhere in that skyline, my family's empire built on arrogance and entitlement was cracking apart in real time. Another buzz. Brian's family is furious. His mother walked out. His father is demanding answers. I smiled. The ice pack pressed against my cheek, now more symbolic than soothing. For years, I had endured their dismissals, their cruelty, their insults that sliced deeper than any blade. But tonight, the humiliation was theirs to carry. Down in the ballroom, chaos had erupted. Guests whispered furiously, phones lighting up as the live stream spread like wildfire. The once admiring glances toward Isabella had shifted to pity, even disgust. Her mascara-streaked tears, once a tool of manipulation, now looked pathetic under the harsh reality of exposure. Isabella, what did you know about this? Ethan's mother demanded, her voice sharp as glass. Nothing, Isabella stammered. I didn't, it wasn't my idea. But the slight curve of satisfaction that had played on her lips earlier was burned into everyone's memory. She had played along, and now she was trapped in the consequences. My phone lit up again with a message from an old family friend. It's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Number. Penthouse ambush. Is trending. Trending. The words made me laugh out loud. For 32 years, my family had told me I was invisible, irrelevant, a disappointment. And now, I was the headline. Another notification appeared, this one from an unexpected source. A news alert. Local business tycoon faces backlash after publicly assaulting daughter. The headline alone was enough to gut my father's reputation. Deals he had courted for years would vanish overnight. And they did. Within hours, messages flooded his inbox. One from Jim Patterson of Patterson Industries. Richard, I saw the video. We need to reconsider our contract. Call me when you have answers. Another from David Kim of Kim Electronics. This behavior is deeply troubling. My wife insists we pull out of negotiations immediately. And the most brutal, Sarah Williams of Williams Logistics. I don't do business with people who hit their children. Contract terminated. A $3 million annual deal gone in a single text. The cracks were widening into fractures. Meanwhile, in the ballroom, the Caldwell family was imploding. Ethan's father's voice thundered across the reception hall. We will not have our son tied to a family capable of such disgrace. His mother clutched her pearls, muttering about reputations and scandal. Ethan stood frozen, caught between the bride he had promised to love and the family he couldn't afford to disappoint. Isabella sobbed dramatically, reaching for him. Please, Ethan, don't let them ruin our day. But even through the phone, I could hear his hesitation. His silence was louder than her pleas. Guests began to leave. Chairs scraped against marble, heels clicked hurriedly toward the exit, murmurs of disgust echoing through the ballroom. What was meant to be Isabella's fairy tale night had devolved into a public catastrophe. And still, the cameras rolled. The live stream that had captured my humiliation now captured theirs, Margaret shrieking, Charles pleading, Isabella wailing as her perfect day collapsed. The internet ate it up. Clips spread like wildfire. The slap heard around the ballroom, penthouse heist gone wrong, bride's family implodes on live stream. By midnight, the hashtag number Team Amelia was trending alongside number Toxic Parents. For the first time in my life, strangers defended me with the kind of passion my family had never mustered. Comments poured in. She doesn't owe them anything. Stand your ground, Amelia. That penthouse is hers, end of story. As I scrolled through the messages, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Alexander. Your father is begging me to stop the bleeding, he said. He's terrified. 3 more contracts are at risk. His empire is crumbling. I leaned against the glass, looking out at the city lights. Good, I said simply. Amelia, Alexander's tone softened. This is just the beginning. The board will call for his head if this continues. I know, I whispered. Let them. Because for once, it wasn't me being diminished. It wasn't me being dismissed. It was them stripped bare, exposed, drowning in the very humiliation they had forced me to live with all my life. Back in the ballroom, Isabella's wedding was in shambles. Guests had fled, the cake sat untouched, the band had stopped playing. And in the center of it all, my parents were learning the most painful lesson of all. The daughter they had dismissed as worthless was the one holding all the cards. By Monday morning, the storm had gone from viral scandal to business earthquake. My father's empire, once spoken of with respect, was now synonymous with humiliation. The video of Margaret slapping me had been clipped, looped, and turned into GIFs with captions like, "Toxic parents in action," and entitled "Family Gets Exposed." At Sterling Capital, the reaction was very different. My assistant rushed into my office the moment I walked in, her eyes wide. "Boss, you're trending. 5 headhunters already called this morning asking if you're open to new opportunities." I set my coffee on the desk, more amused than surprised. "Tell them no. I'm exactly where I need to be." Minutes later, Alexander Wu summoned me to his corner office. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The board wants to promote you," he said flatly. I blinked. "Promote me? Because I got slapped at a wedding?" "Because you didn't crumble," he corrected. "You stood your ground under impossible social pressure, you protected corporate assets, and you leveraged a crisis into strength. That's leadership." Senior Vice President of Global Operations, stock options, a 40% raise. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Years of invisibility, years of being dismissed, years of clawing for recognition that never came, and here it was, not from the people who should have given it, but from those who truly understood what it meant to fight and win. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. The penthouse that had once been my symbol of independence was now merely the beginning. Meanwhile, my father's downfall accelerated. 6 contracts evaporated within days. Without Alexander's capital and with clients abandoning him in droves, his long-planned expansion collapsed overnight. Colleagues who once toasted his vision now whispered about his arrogance. His reputation, the currency he valued above all else, was bankrupt. Margaret, true to form, refused to apologize. Instead, she went on social media rants, calling me ungrateful, selfish, corrupted by corporate greed. Screenshots of her tirades spread faster than she could delete them, accompanied by comments like, "And now we know where the toxicity started." Even relatives who had once laughed at my expense began reaching out privately. Cousin Derek, the same one who mocked me about not having a date, sent a message. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize they treated you like that all the time," Aunt Patricia confessed. "Your mother is my sister, but she was wrong. I'm proud of you for standing up." It was surreal. The same voices that once belittled me now whispered admiration, but their approval didn't matter anymore. I had stopped craving it the night my mother's hand cracked across my face. As for Isabella, her fairy tale dissolved faster than sugar in hot water. The Caldwell family postponed the honeymoon indefinitely. "Until we reassess the relationship dynamics," Ethan's father reportedly said. Her dream marriage began with suspicion and ended in counseling sessions she never wanted. She texted me once, weeks later, "You ruined my life. Brian's family thinks we're toxic. I hate you." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "I didn't ruin your life, Isabella. I just stopped sacrificing mine." She never responded. Back at Sterling Capital, my rise became a story of its own. Forbes called me for an interview. The Wall Street Journal profiled me as one of the few women shaping Asia-Pacific finance. Headlines framed me not as the invisible daughter, but as the executive who refused to be bullied. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 32 years, my parents had tried to erase me, and now my name was everywhere, not theirs. One evening, I stood at the massive windows of my penthouse, the city glowing beneath me, a glass of wine in hand. The same diamond earring my mother had slapped off my face glittered in the reflection. I had put it back in that night, not as jewelry, but as a statement. Every time I touched it, I remembered. I had walked away with dignity intact while they drowned in disgrace. Alexander once told me, "The best revenge is a life well lived without them." I finally understood. Revenge wasn't screaming in their faces. It wasn't proving them wrong in words. It was showing the world I didn't need them, and thriving without their approval. And I was thriving. While my father scrambled to salvage what little remained, while my mother ranted to an audience that had already stopped listening, while Isabella sat in therapy sessions she despised, I stood taller, freer, stronger. The girl they dismissed was gone. What remained was a woman who had built an empire of her own. 6 months after the slap heard around the ballroom, my life looked nothing like it had before. The chaos had settled into a new reality, one where I finally breathed without the weight of family expectations pressing down on my chest. The first step had been simple but brutal. I blocked my parents on every platform. No dramatic announcement. No explanation. No farewell speech. Just quiet removal. Their names, Charles and Margaret Grant, went on the permanent ban list at my penthouse. My doorman, James, nodded with understanding when I gave him the list. "Good for you," he said softly. My daughter had to do the same thing. Family isn't always family. Those words stayed with me, because he was right. Blood had bound me to them biologically, but respect had never existed, and respect, I had learned, is the only currency that makes someone family. In their absence, I found something unexpected: peace. Mornings became sacred. I would brew coffee in my penthouse kitchen, barefoot on the cool marble, watching the sunrise through the glass walls. The city stretched endlessly, golden light spilling across the skyline. It felt like the universe itself whispering, "You made it. You survived. You're free." But I didn't just survive. I rebuilt. At Sterling Capital, my team became my family in ways my blood never had. We celebrated wins together with champagne on Friday nights, we covered for each other during hard times, and we never demanded sacrifices that weren't ours to ask. They saw me not as a disappointment, but as a leader, one who protected them as fiercely as I had protected myself. Alexander and his wife even invited me into their home. Their daughters, both in college, looked at me with wide eyes when I visited. One of them once whispered, "You're proof we don't have to shrink ourselves for anyone." That sentence hit me harder than any insult my mother had ever thrown. Because for once, my existence wasn't something to mock, it was something to aspire to. Still, healing wasn't linear. There were nights when the echoes of the past returned, when I'd catch myself wondering, would they ever be proud of me? But then I remembered. Pride from people who never valued me was a mirage. Chasing it only led back into the desert of their cruelty. I replaced those doubts with boundaries. When Isabella texted me after her marriage crumbled, "I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted." I lost everything. I responded only once. "I got what I earned." There's a difference. Then I blocked her too. It wasn't spite. It was self-preservation. Because healing isn't about fixing what's broken in others. It's about protecting what's finally whole in yourself. As months passed, recognition followed me like a shadow, but a good one. The kind I had once craved from the wrong people. Forbes 40. Under 40 named me one of the top innovators in global finance. The article didn't mention the slap, the wedding, or my parents. It focused solely on what I had built, what I had achieved, who I had become. And that was enough. One quiet evening, I poured a glass of wine and stood at the window of my penthouse, watching the city flicker alive with neon. My sanctuary, my fortress. The very thing my family had tried to steal now stood as proof that I had chosen myself. I thought back to the girl I had been, the one crying silently in bathrooms at family reunions, the one begging silently for validation that never came. She would never have believed this future was possible. But I had fought for her. I had turned scars into armor, invisibility into influence, humiliation into power. And in doing so, I had discovered the most radical truth of all. I didn't need their love. I only needed my own. I raised the glass in a silent toast, not to the Grants, but to the life I had carved from their cruelty. "To peace," I whispered. And for the first time in decades, I felt it. Real, unshakable peace. When people ask me now, "What happened at your sister's wedding?" I smile faintly. They want the juicy version. The slap. The live stream. The CEO storming in with lawyers. And yes, those things happened. But what truly mattered wasn't the spectacle. It was what came after. Because the real story isn't about losing a family. It's about finding myself. For 32 years, I believed the cruelest lie. That my worth depended on the approval of people who never valued me. I built skyscrapers of achievement, hoping they'd glance up long enough to see me. I bled for recognition, thinking it might buy me love. I traded sleep, comfort, and sometimes even joy just to hear one sentence I never did. "We're proud of you, Amelia." That sentence never came, and eventually, I realized why. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that they would never see me as enough. Their vision of daughter was soft, obedient, self-sacrificing. I was ambitious, sharp, unwilling to shrink. No amount of penthouses, promotions, or headlines could rewrite the script they had cast me in. And once I accepted that, I was free. The night my mother's hand cracked across my face, I thought I had been broken. But in reality, that slap shattered the last illusion I had clung to, the illusion that their approval was still something worth chasing. When I walked out of that ballroom, I left behind more than a wedding gone wrong. I left behind a role I had never agreed to play. I stopped being the difficult daughter, the scapegoat, the backup plan. I became Amelia fully, unapologetically, fiercely myself. And here's the truth I learned the hard way. Blood does not make you family, respect does. Family isn't the people who share your DNA. Family is the people who celebrate your victories, stand beside you in storms, and never demand you sacrifice your dignity for their comfort. Sometimes those people are friends, colleagues, mentors. Sometimes they're the ones you choose, not the ones you were born to. My family now is the team I lead at Sterling Capital, the colleagues who raise glasses with me after long weeks, the mentor who fought beside me when my parents tried to strip me bare, and even the doorman who told me, "Good for you," when I cut ties with those who only brought pain. That's family. The lesson? You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't owe anyone your success. You don't owe anyone the fruits of your labor simply because you share a last name. If someone treats your boundaries like obstacles to bulldoze, if they belittle your achievements, if they demand you set yourself on fire to keep them warm, you are not obligated to call that love. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to choose yourself. The cost may be high. I lost a father who never saw me, a mother who resented me, a sister who envied me. But what I gained was priceless: self-respect, peace, and a life built on my own terms. When I stand at the window of my penthouse now, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise above the skyline, I don't see just glass and steel. I see proof. Proof that I survived. Proof that I chose myself when no one else did. Proof that scars don't define us, they refine us. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been told you're too much, too loud, too ambitious, too anything, hear me when I say this. Your success is valid even if they never acknowledge it. Your boundaries matter even if they mock them. Your peace is worth more than their approval. You don't need to earn their love. You need to protect your own. So, here's my final message. Don't waste your life begging people to see you. Stand tall, even when they try to cut you down. Build your sanctuary, whatever it looks like, and guard it fiercely. Because at the end of the day, you don't owe them your happiness. You owe yourself the chance to live free. I chose myself, and it was the best decision I ever made. Now I'll ask you, if you were standing in my shoes, with the whole world watching, would you have given away everything to keep the peace? Or would you have finally chosen yourself? Comment below. Because I want to know, what boundaries are you ready to draw today? The screen fades to black, then slowly brightens to the glow of a sunrise over the city skyline. Once I believed family meant blood. That no matter how sharp their words, no matter how deep their cuts, I owed them my silence. I thought if I worked harder, smiled wider, gave more, maybe one day they would see me. But the truth is, they never did. And that night, under the glittering chandeliers of a ballroom filled with strangers, my mother's hand didn't just strike my face. It shattered the chains I had carried all my life. When I walked away, I wasn't walking out of a wedding. I was walking out of a prison I had mistaken for home. And what came after wasn't just revenge, it was rebirth. I built my own family not of blood, but of choice. People who saw me, valued me, respected me. I discovered that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to peace. That silence isn't weakness. It's power when you choose who deserves your voice. So hear me now. You don't need to set yourself on fire to keep anyone warm. You don't need to hand over the keys to your hard-earned life just to buy affection. You don't need their approval to be enough. Because you already are. I chose myself. And I will never apologize for it. The question is, when the time comes, will you? The music swells, the screen fades, leaving only one line in bold white letters. Would you choose peace or sacrifice yourself for their approval?